You have 5 minutes to clean up. My wife's dad, the CEO, fired me in front of all the leaders. I left and said, thank you. Immediately after that, 22 top coworkers stood up one by one, quietly following me. He laughed arrogantly until the legal director panicked and said, call a lawyer now. Look, I've sat through a lot of pointless meetings in my career. The kind where someone uses synergy unironically and everyone nods like they're not screaming internally. But this particular Tuesday morning meeting, this was different. This was the kind of meeting that gets turned into a LinkedIn cautionary tale, except nobody believes it actually happened because it's too brutally stupid to be real. The boardroom smelled like a department store cologne counter had a one-night stand with desperation and poor life choices. You know that specific scent? Overpriced designer fragrances mixed with leather chairs that cost more than my first car and the underlying musk of corporate egos so inflated they could float the Thanksgiving Day parade. I was sitting there minding my own business reviewing quarterly projections that I'd stayed up until 2:00 a.m. perfecting when Richard Callaway decided to make his grand entrance. Richard Callaway, my father-in-law, the CEO. The man who once told me at Thanksgiving dinner that he saw potential in me. Right before asking me to pass the gravy like I was the help, he strutted into that boardroom like he owned the place, which to be fair, he technically did, but with the kind of energy that suggested he thought he owned all of us, too. His face was already the particular shade of red that meant someone had either challenged his authority or served him decaf instead of regular. Spoiler alert, it was about to get redder. He didn't ease into it. No. Good morning, team. Or let's discuss some concerns. Nope. Richard Callaway slammed his palm on that mahogany table so hard I'm pretty sure the wood developed PTSD and he barked. And I mean full-on German Shepherd energy here. You have 5 minutes to clean up your desk. 5 minutes like I was some unpaid intern who'd accidentally forwarded the CEO's angry rant email to the entire company listserv like I hadn't spent the last 6 years building the infrastructure that kept this place running like I was a stain on his precious conference table that needed immediate removal before the important guests arrived. The silence that followed was the kind you feel in your bones. 12 executives sat frozen, their expensive pins hovering over their leather portfolios like they'd been hit with a pause button. Someone's coffee cup made this tiny clink against a saucer. And it sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. I could practically hear everyone's internal screaming. That desperate mental calculation of do I look at him? Do I look away? Do I check my phone and pretend I didn't hear that? Here's what I didn't do. I didn't argue. I didn't stand up and launch into some passionate defense of my record, my achievements, my late nights, my sacrifices. I didn't beg. God, I definitely didn't beg. I'd watched too many people try to cling to positions they'd already lost, scrambling for dignity while it slipped through their fingers like water. That wasn't going to be me. Instead, I smiled. Not a big smile, nothing theatrical, just a small, knowing smile. The kind that says, okay, I see exactly what game we're playing here. And, buddy, you have no idea what you just started. I stood up slowly, deliberately, like I had all the time in the world, which was ironic considering I'd just been given exactly 5 minutes. I started packing my notes, not frantically, not with the desperate energy of someone who's been humiliated. Methodically, calmly, I took my quarterly reports, the ones that showed a 340% increase in efficiency in my department. I took my project plans, the ones that mapped out the next 3 years of development. I took my team evaluations, the documents that proved every single person in my department was performing at or above expectations because I actually gave a damn about developing talent. The whole time, Richard stood there like a peacock who'd just displayed his feathers, clearly expecting me to crumble, to gravel, to ask for another chance. His smirk was the kind of self-satisfied expression you see on people who've never actually been challenged in their entire lives. The kind of look that screamed, I win. Without understanding what game we were even playing. I zipped up my leather portfolio, a gift from my wife. Actually back when she still believed her father's company was a meritocracy and not a nepotism factory with a corporate charter. And I turned to face Richard directly. The executives were all staring now, some pretending to scribble notes like they were courtroom stenographers documenting a historic trial. Others just frozen in the awkwardness of witnessing someone's professional execution. Thank you, I said. 2 words. Quiet, sincere, even. Not sarcastic, not bitter, just, thank you. The silence somehow got louder. It's a weird thing, silence getting louder, but it absolutely did. It was like the entire room collectively inhaled and forgot how to exhale. Some of the executives literally blinked in confusion, their brains trying to process why the guy who just got fired was expressing gratitude. A couple of them glanced at each other with that look. You know the one that did that just happen? Look that people get when reality takes a left turn into the bizarre. Richard's smirk widened. He thought he'd broken me. He thought my calm was surrender. My thank you was admission of defeat. My lack of resistance was proof that he'd been right all along to cut me loose. He probably imagined himself telling this story at the country club later. How he'd cleaned house, made the tough decisions, showed everyone who was really in charge. He had absolutely no idea. No clue that my smile wasn't defeat. It was the opening move in a chess game. He didn't even know we were playing. No understanding that my thank you wasn't gratitude for the job I just lost, but gratitude for the freedom I'd just gained. No comprehension whatsoever that in trying to humiliate me, he'd just handed me the perfect exit from a company I'd been planning to leave anyway, complete with witnesses, documentation, and a severance package he'd somehow forgotten to calculate properly. As I walked toward the door, portfolio under my arm, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass wall. I looked calm, professional, maybe even a little relieved. Behind me, Richard was already moving on, probably planning his next power play, already dismissing me as yesterday's problem. But some of the smarter executives, they weren't smiling anymore. Karen Briggs from legal looked like she'd just watched a car crash in slow motion. Marcus Chin from finance had gone pale. Even Peterson from operations, who usually had the emotional range of a brick wall, looked concerned. They knew something Richard didn't. They knew that firing your chief technical officer in front of the entire executive board with witnesses without proper procedure or documentation wasn't just bad form. It was a legal nuclear bomb with a very short fuse. And me, I was already counting down to detonation. I wish I could tell you I had planned what happened next. I wish I could say I orchestrated some brilliant master plan where I knew exactly how the dominoes would fall, that I'd strategically positioned my chess pieces for maximum dramatic effect. But honestly, I was just trying to get to the elevator before my poker face cracked and everyone saw how much my hands were shaking. The walk from the boardroom to my office should have been a walk of shame. You know that horrible corridor traverse where everyone pretends not to stare while absolutely staring. Where people suddenly become fascinated with their computer screens, where the hushed whispers follow you like a bad soundtrack. That's what Richard expected. That's what he wanted. Me slinking away with my tail between my legs while he stood victorious in his glass tower, king of his little corporate kingdom. Except the universe had other plans. I was maybe 20 feet down the hallway, still processing the fact that my Tuesday had gone from boring quarterly review to suddenly unemployed in the span of 5 minutes when I heard it. A chair squeaking. That specific sound of someone standing up quickly in one of those overpriced ergonomic chairs that the company spent $3,000 on because someone read an article about workplace wellness. I didn't turn around. Honestly thought someone was just getting up to refill their coffee or escape to the bathroom to avoid the awkwardness. But then I heard another chair and then the sound that will probably be etched into my brain until I'm old and senile. Footsteps. Multiple footsteps. Not walking toward the break room or the restrooms, but following me. That's when I turned around. Logan Chun was the first person I saw. Senior engineer, brilliant developer, the guy who could debug code in his sleep and had once fixed a critical system failure at 3 a.m. while drunk on cheap whiskey and spite. He had his laptop bag slung over his shoulder and his security badge in his hand, the universal sign of someone who's about to walk out of a building and not come back. He caught my eye and just nodded. No words, just this simple solid nod that said more than any speech could. Behind him was Priya Malik, our lead data scientist, who turned down offers from Google and Amazon to stay with us because, and I quote, the work was too interesting to leave. She had that determined look on her face, the same expression she got when someone told her a problem was impossible, and she took it as a personal challenge. Her messenger bag was already packed, like she'd been waiting for an excuse. Then came Dylan Torres, our systems architect, who had a tendency to quote obscure philosophy while explaining cloud infrastructure and somehow make it make sense. He was wearing his usual ironic tech startup t-shirt. This one said there's no place like 127.0.0.1 and carrying his vintage lunchbox that he was weirdly protective of, and they just kept coming. Sarah from DevOps, Marcus from security, the twins from QA. Yes, we had twins in quality assurance. And yes, they finished each other's sentences in the creepiest productive way possible. Ahmed from infrastructure, Jessica from integration, the entire goddamn R&D team that I personally hired, trained, and watched grow from nervous junior developers into absolute powerhouses of technical talent. Within what felt like minutes, but was probably closer to 5, 22 people were following me down that hallway. 22 coworkers, colleagues, friends, people I'd grabbed late night pizza with during deployment disasters. People I'd covered for when they needed mental health days. People who'd covered for me when my wife's family obligations made me late. We were a unit, a team, a well-oiled machine that Richard Callaway had apparently forgotten couldn't function without its parts. The squeaking of chairs became this chorus, this symphony of office furniture protesting the sudden mass exodus. It echoed through the open-plan office space like dominoes falling. Each squeak announcing another defection. People who weren't even in my department stopped typing to watch. Mouths literally hung open. Someone dropped their coffee mug. I heard it shatter in the distance, followed by a very creative string of curses. Back in the boardroom, I could see through the glass walls as the executives scrambled to the windows to witness the spectacle. Richard stood there, and even from a distance I could see the moment his brain tried to process what was happening. His expression went through this fascinating journey. Confusion, then disbelief, then a forced chuckle that was supposed to convey, "This doesn't bother me at all," but actually screamed, "I've made a terrible mistake." He actually said it loud enough that someone heard and later told me, "Let them go." He announced to the remaining board members, waving his hand dismissively like he was brushing away an annoying fly. Dead weight. Dead weight. 22 of the most talented people in the company. The ones who actually understood how the systems worked, who held the institutional knowledge, who could actually execute on the fancy strategies that Richard loved to brainstorm in his executive retreats. Dead weight. I watched through the glass as Karen Briggs from legal turned a color I can only describe as white. Marcus from finance looked like he was doing rapid mental calculations and not liking any of the numbers he was coming up with. Even Peterson from operations, stoic, unflappable Peterson, had his hand on his forehead like he was checking himself for a fever. The board members weren't smiling anymore. They were looking at each other with expressions that ranged from, "Did we just witness corporate suicide?" to, "Can I update my resume before this hits the news?" A couple of them were already reaching for their phones, probably texting their headhunters or their lawyers or possibly both. But Richard was still standing there with that arrogant chuckle like he just made the power move of the century. Like watching nearly 24 highly skilled employees walk out wasn't a flashing neon sign that said "major problem here." He genuinely believed his own hype. Thought he was so indispensable that the company would just continue. Like, you could swap out the people who built the engine and expect the car to keep running on vibes and executive confidence alone. I didn't have to say a single word. Didn't need to give a dramatic speech or rally the troops with some inspirational manifesto about standing up to corporate tyranny. My so-called humiliation, the public firing, the 5-minute deadline, the dismissive treatment had just transformed into something else entirely. A parade, an exodus, a statement so loud that silence was the only appropriate soundtrack. We walked in this weird solemn procession, like a funeral march, except nobody was dead. Well, except maybe Richard's career prospects, but I didn't know that yet. The clicking of our footsteps on the polished floors, the rustling of bags and boxes, the occasional whisper that got quickly shushed. We passed the reception desk where Miranda looked up from her computer with her mouth literally hanging open, her perfectly manicured nails frozen over her keyboard. "Have a good day, Miranda," I said pleasantly, like this was just a normal Tuesday, and I wasn't leading a corporate walkout. You too," she managed, her voice going up at the end like it was a question. The elevator dinged open like it had been waiting for us, and somehow, miraculously, we all fit. It was cramped and uncomfortable, and someone's laptop bag was digging into my ribs, but nobody complained. Dylan started humming the theme from The Great Escape. Someone laughed, then someone else. Pretty soon, the whole elevator was filled with this nervous, exhilarated laughter, the kind you get when you've just done something monumentally stupid or monumentally brilliant, and you won't know which until later. "So," Logan said as we descended, "anyone have a plan?" I looked at 22 faces staring back at me expectantly, and I realized something both terrifying and thrilling. I was now responsible for 22 people's livelihoods, dreams, and futures. "Working on it," I said with way more confidence than I felt. The elevator doors opened to the lobby and we stepped out into our uncertain future together. Behind us on the 15th floor, Richard Calloway was about to discover exactly what dead weight actually meant. So, here's something they don't teach you in business school. The exact moment when someone realizes they've screwed up so monumentally that their entire career might implode is actually visible on their face. It's like watching a computer crash in slow motion. First, the screen freezes, then you see that little spinning wheel of death, and then everything just stops. That's what happened to Karen Briggs. Karen Briggs was the legal director at Apex Nova. And if you've ever met a corporate lawyer who takes their job seriously, you know the type. She was the woman who read every contract like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls, who color-coded her file folders by threat level, who had probably never gotten a parking ticket in her entire life because she calculated the exact legal ramifications of every action before taking it. She wore power suits that cost more than my monthly rent and drank these organic green smoothies that looked like liquefied lawn clippings, but apparently cost $18 each. I found out later because office gossip travels faster than fiber optic internet that Karen had been sitting in that boardroom during my firing sipping her disgusting health drink, probably mentally reviewing some contract dispute or patent filing. She wasn't paying full attention to Richard's little power play. Why would she? CEOs fired people all the time. It was practically a Tuesday tradition. But then she saw us leave. 22 people walking out in formation like some kind of corporate protest march. And something in her lawyer brain went, wait a minute. According to Dylan, who heard it from Marcus, who heard it from his girlfriend who worked in HR, Karen literally choked on her smoothie. Like full-on coughing, sputtering, green liquid probably coming out of her nose situation. She slammed her folder shut with enough force that several executives jumped and she snapped. And I mean snapped with the energy of someone who just watched a train derail in real time. Call a lawyer. Now, the irony of the lawyer telling people to call a lawyer was apparently lost on everyone in that moment. Richard's face, according to multiple witnesses who delighted in describing it to me later, went through an entire journey of human emotion in about 3 seconds. First was confusion, that scrunched up look people get when they're trying to figure out why everyone's suddenly panicking. Then came the constipation phase, which I can only assume meant realization was trying to break through, but was getting stuck somewhere in his executive ego. His mouth opened and closed like a fish that had just been informed the ocean was actually a very bad place to live. What are you talking about? He apparently said, which is rich coming from the guy who just publicly executed someone's career without checking the fine print. Karen, bless her legally paranoid heart, was already speed walking toward the HR office in her 3-inch heels, moving faster than I'd ever seen a person in business formal attire move without technically running. She burst through the HR department doors like a SWAT team member breaching a building. Except instead of tactical gear, she was wearing Armani and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my car. Pull West's employment contract now and get me the severance calculation spreadsheet and someone find me the employee handbook section on termination procedures. And for the love of God, please tell me someone documented the proper protocol before he was fired. The silence that followed was apparently deafening. Here's what nobody had bothered to check. Because why would they when the CEO makes a decision and everyone just falls in line like obedient corporate soldiers? My contract had a clause, a very specific, very carefully worded clause that my lawyer had insisted on when I first signed 6 years ago. Back when I was young and naive enough to think employment contracts were just formalities, but smart enough to hire someone who knew better. The clause was simple. If I was terminated without cause, I got a standard severance package. Nothing fancy, just the usual. We're parting ways amicably payout. But, and this was the beautiful part, if I was terminated without cause and the termination was conducted in a manner that could be considered humiliating, unprofessional, or damaging to my professional reputation, well, the severance package multiplied significantly. And what's more humiliating and unprofessional than being told you have 5 minutes to clean up your desk in front of the entire executive board like you're some kind of criminal being perp walked out of the building? With 12 witnesses who could testify to the exact wording, tone, and public nature of the dismissal, Karen apparently read the clause 3 times, each time getting progressively paler. Then she read the severance calculation formula. Then she pulled out her phone calculator and started running numbers. Her fingers stabbing at the screen with increasing desperation. How much are we talking about? Richard asked, finally having the good sense to sound worried. Karen looked up from her calculations with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to explain quantum physics to a toddler and didn't know where to start. Best case scenario, assuming he doesn't sue for additional damages, $640,000, plus his full benefits package for 18 months, plus stock options that vest immediately instead of over time, plus a non-disparagement agreement that works both ways, meaning we can't say anything negative about him. And honestly, at this point, I'd recommend we don't say anything about him at all. The number hung in the air like a bad smell. 600. Richard's voice trailed off. Probably because his brain was doing that thing where it tries to comprehend large numbers and just gives up. That's the best case scenario, Karen emphasized. And I imagine she was doing that thing lawyers do where they speak slowly and clearly like they're addressing someone who might be slightly concussed. Worst case scenario, he lawyers up, sues for wrongful termination, hostile work environment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and damage to professional reputation. We have 12 witnesses who saw you humiliate him. We have, however, many employees just walked out with him as evidence of company culture problems. We have social media where this is probably already spreading because, someone in that boardroom is texting their contacts right now. She wasn't wrong about that last part. My phone had already started buzzing in my pocket, but I was too busy processing my newfound unemployment to check it. Plus, Karen continued, really warming up now. apparently enjoying watching Richard squirm in the hell of his own creation. Those 22 employees who just walked out. If they claim constructive discharge, meaning they felt forced to leave because of hostile management practices, we could be looking at 22 separate legal actions, and at least half of them probably have similar contractual protections because you insisted on using the same contract template for all senior technical staff. I found out later that Marcus from finance actually had to sit down during this conversation because he was doing rapid mental math about what this would do to the quarterly earnings report. Spoiler alert, it wasn't good. But he said, "Thank you." Richard protested weakly, grasping at straws like a drowning man reaching for a pool noodle. "He thanked me. Doesn't that show he accepted the termination gracefully?" Karen actually laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you hear from someone who's watching a house burn down. And the homeowner is asking if the garden hose might help. That shows he's smart enough not to lose his temper in front of witnesses, which actually makes him more credible if this goes to court. A judge is going to see a man who kept his composure during a humiliating public termination. And then they're going to see the CEO who created that humiliating public termination. And guess which one looks more sympathetic? The boardroom had gone from triumphant corporate efficiency to legal disaster zone in approximately 15 minutes. Some of the executives were already making excuses to leave. Prior commitment. Another meeting. Sudden onset explosive diarrhea. Okay, maybe not that last one, but they were definitely fleeing the scene like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Richard slumped into his expensive leather chair, the same chair he'd been standing next to when he delivered my 5-minute ultimatum. His arrogant smirk had been completely replaced with something between panic and denial. That special look people get when they're trying to convince themselves that maybe it's not as bad as it seems, while simultaneously knowing it's probably worse. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. Karen closed her folder, straightened her suit, and delivered the kind of line that probably echoed in Richard's nightmares for weeks afterward. "We call our insurance company, explain that we need to activate our directors' and officers' liability policy and pray they don't laugh us off the phone. Then we call your personal attorney. Then we draft a very generous severance offer and hope he takes it before he talks to his own lawyers." She paused at the door, green smoothie abandoned on the conference table. "And Richard, next time you want to fire someone for dramatic effect, maybe run it by legal first." The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that sounded expensive. You know that feeling when you walk out of a building and the sunlight hits you and for a second you can't tell if you're about to have a complete breakdown or the best day of your life? Yeah, that's where I was at. Standing in the parking lot of Apex Nova with 22 other people who just collectively decided that career suicide was preferable to another day under Richard Culloway's thumb. The funny thing about corporate office buildings is that they're designed to be intimidating. All that glass and steel and architectural posturing, like they're trying to say, "Look how important we are," while simultaneously making you feel like an ant approaching a shoe. But from the parking lot, squinting up at the 15th floor, where I could still see figures moving behind those expensive floor-to-ceiling windows. The building just looked small, fragile, even. We stood there in this weird cluster, 23 people in business casual attire having a collective "what the hell did we just do" moment. Nobody was talking. We were all just kind of existing in this bubble of shock and adrenaline and probably some deeply suppressed panic about mortgages and car payments and whether our health insurance was still active. Logan broke the silence first. "So that happened." "That definitely happened," Priya confirmed, adjusting her bag strap like she was trying to ground herself in physical reality. Dylan was staring at the building with this expression I'd seen before. The one he got when he was processing something complex and his brain needed a minute to compile. "Did we just, are we unemployed now? Is that what just happened? Because I have student loans and a cat with kidney disease and I'm not emotionally prepared for unemployment." "Your cat has kidney disease?" Sarah from DevOps asked, momentarily distracted from our collective crisis. "That's what you're focusing on right now?" Dylan shot back, but he was almost smiling. And that's when I heard it, a slow clap. One person clapping deliberately, each clap echoing across the parking lot like some kind of sarcastic movie soundtrack. We all turned to see who was mocking our corporate suicide pact, ready to defend our admittedly questionable life choices. It was Miguel from facilities. Miguel, who'd been working at Apex Nova for probably 15 years, who knew where every pipe and wire and structural weak point in the building was located, who'd saved the company's ass more times than anyone could count when the AC died during summer or the heating failed in winter. He was standing by the loading dock in his maintenance uniform, work gloves tucked into his belt, and he was clapping. Not mockingly, genuinely. "About damn time someone stood up to that Pencho," Miguel called out, switching from his slow clap to actual applause. "I've been watching him treat people like garbage for years. You all got balls. I'll give you that." Then someone else started clapping. Jennifer from the mail room, who had always been nice to because being nice to mail room people is both basic human decency and also smart strategy when you're waiting on important documents. She was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. He made me cry in front of the entire shipping department last month. She yelled, still clapping, called me incompetent because a package was delayed. It was delayed because of a hurricane in Florida, which last I checked, I cannot control. More people were emerging from the building now, not executives. They were probably still upstairs doing damage control or updating their LinkedIn profiles. But the regular folks, the people who actually made the company function while management took credit and cashed bigger checks, security guards, administrative assistants, people from accounting who looked thrilled to have drama that didn't involve spreadsheets. Someone whistled. You know that two-finger whistle that sounds like you're calling a really well-trained dog? Except this was celebratory, supportive, the kind of whistle you hear at concerts or sporting events when something awesome happens. And then Tommy, the janitor who worked the day shift and always had earbuds in while he cleaned because he was apparently working his way through every podcast about true crime ever recorded, raised his mop. Literally held it up like a flag or a sword or some kind of revolutionary symbol. The mop head was dripping slightly. Definitely not optimal for dramatic gestures, but the intent was clear. Solidarity, he yelled, apparently having listened to some podcasts about labor movements in addition to the murder ones. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not the nervous kind of laughter from the elevator, but genuine full-belly laughter that felt like it was releasing about 6 years of accumulated stress and frustration. And all those times I'd bitten my tongue in meetings where Richard said something monumentally stupid and everyone nodded along like he'd just invented fire. Priya was laughing too, tears streaming down her face. Logan had his hands on his knees wheezing. Dylan was making this sound that was half laugh, half sob, which honestly felt appropriate for the situation. I wasn't humiliated. I said out loud more to myself than anyone else, but everyone heard it anyway. I'm a legend. Damn right you are, Miguel confirmed, still clapping. The absurdity of the situation was hitting me in waves. This morning, I'd woken up, put on my nice shirt, the one my wife said made me look professional and approachable. Had my usual breakfast of coffee and toast, and driven to a job I'd held for 6 years. A job I'd thought was secure. A job where I'd imagined climbing the corporate ladder, maybe making VP eventually. Definitely getting that corner office that everyone pretended not to want but absolutely wanted. And now I was standing in a parking lot unemployed watching a janitor raise a mop in my honor while people I barely knew applauded my spectacular professional implosion. If someone had told me this morning that this was how my day would go, I would have gone back to bed. But standing there surrounded by 22 people who'd chosen loyalty over security, watching hourly employees cheer for someone finally standing up to managements, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The kind of freedom that comes with burning bridges so thoroughly that you can't go back even if you wanted to. I turned to my crew because that's what they were now. Not coworkers, but my crew. And I said the only thing that felt right in that moment. Don't worry, lunch is on me. As long as it's the dollar menu. The laughter that followed was genuine warm. The kind of laughter that happens when everyone's in the same ridiculous boat. And you might as well enjoy the ride before you figure out if there are any paddles or life vests. I'm lactose intolerant, Dylan said. So, I need to know if we're talking McDonald's or Wendy's because their dairy policies are very different, and I've got opinions. Of course you have opinions about fast food dairy policies, Sarah said, shaking her head but smiling. Maybe we should actually talk about what we're doing, Logan suggested. Ever the practical one, like actual plans, because my wife is going to ask questions when I get home early and I quit my job in a dramatic gesture of solidarity. Probably won't satisfy her concerns about our mortgage. He had a point, several points actually. We were riding high on adrenaline and righteous indignation and the intoxicating feeling of having done something bold and possibly stupid. But reality was going to catch up eventually. Reality always does. Usually around the time your first bills are due. But I looked at these people, brilliant, talented, skilled people who just thrown their professional security into a wood chipper because they believed in something more than just showing up and collecting paychecks. And I felt something click into place. We're going to be fine, I said. And the weird thing was, I actually believed it. Better than fine. Richard thought he was cutting me off. What he actually did was cut off his own oxygen. That company is going to realize very quickly that they just lost the people who actually knew how everything worked. That's a nice inspirational speech, Priya said. But it doesn't pay my rent. Give me a week, I told her. Told all of them. 1 week. I've got contacts. I've got plans. I've got 6 years of institutional knowledge about what that company needs and where they're vulnerable. And more importantly, I've got a contract that's about to pay me enough severance to buy us some time. You sure about that severance? Marcus asked, because of course the guy from finance would ask the practical questions. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the increasingly frantic notifications I'd been ignoring. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. 7 emails with subject lines like urgent contract review and legal matter requiring immediate attention. 2 voicemails from lawyers I definitely didn't hire, which meant they were probably Richard's lawyers trying to get ahead of the situation. Yeah, I said, showing them the phone screen. I'm pretty sure about that severance. The applause in the parking lot had died down, but people were still watching, still filming on their phones. Probably this was going to be all over social media within hours. Maybe already was. Tech workers walk out after CEO's dramatic firing backfires or something equally dramatic and clickworthy. Behind us, 15 floors up. I imagined Richard standing at his window watching his company quite literally walk away. And I smiled because karma wasn't just a concept anymore. It was a parking lot full of witnesses, a lawyer having a panic attack over contract clauses, and 22 people who just voted with their feet. All right, I said, jingling my keys. Who wants dollar menu? I could eat, Logan said. I'm in, Priya added. Dylan raised his hand. If we're going to commit career suicide, we might as well do it on a full stomach. And just like that, our parade continued from the boardroom to the parking lot to whatever came next. We might have been unemployed. We might have been financially uncertain. We might have been absolutely insane. But we were insane together. And somehow that made all the difference. So here's what nobody tells you about modern corporate disasters. They don't unfold in boardrooms anymore. They unfold in real time across 17 different messaging platforms. While you're sitting in a McDonald's parking lot trying to decide if you want a McDouble or a McKick with your sudden unemployment, my phone started buzzing. Approximately 3 minutes after we left the building. At first, it was just a gentle vibration, 1 notification, maybe 2. The kind of thing you ignore while you're driving because you're a responsible adult who doesn't check their phone at red lights, even though absolutely everyone does. But by the time we pulled into the McDonald's lot, my phone sounded like a microwave full of forks having a seizure. Buzz, 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 continuous, relentless. The kind of notification assault that makes you wonder if your phone is about to achieve sentience and demand better working conditions. Dude, your phone okay? Dylan asked from the passenger seat, staring at my jacket pocket like it might explode. I pulled it out and immediately understood why people in horror movies always say, "Oh no." Right before everything goes to hell, my lock screen was completely obscured by notification banners, Slack messages, WhatsApp pings, regular texts, emails, LinkedIn notifications, even a couple of Instagram DMs, which was weird because I barely used Instagram and definitely hadn't posted anything about getting fired yet. Oh no, I said, apparently following the horror movie script to the letter. I unlocked my phone and watched as the notifications organized themselves into something resembling coherent chaos. The Apex Nova Company Slack workspace was having a complete meltdown. The general channel, which usually averaged maybe 10 messages a day, mostly people asking about lunch plans or whether anyone had seen The Good Stapler, had 247 unread messages in 30 minutes. I scrolled through them, each message more unhinged than the last. Did West really just quit? Not quit. Fired in front of everyone. Wait, what? When did this happen? Like 20 minutes ago. It was brutal. Define brutal because I need details immediately. Callaway gave him 5 minutes to pack up. Called him out in the board meeting. Just straight up executed him corporate style. That's illegal, right? That feels illegal. Oh, it's super illegal. Karen from legal is losing it upstairs. How do you know that? Her assistant told someone in HR who told me. Apparently, they're already calculating severance and it's bad. Bad for West, bad for the company, you absolute walnut. I couldn't help but smile at absolute walnut. That was definitely Marcus from finance's handiwork. He had a way with creative insults that somehow never quite crossed the line into HR violation territory. The messages kept coming and I kept scrolling, watching my professional life become office gossip in real time. But it got better or worse depending on your perspective. Someone had created a new Slack channel called Exodus Watch and somehow I still had access to it even though I was technically no longer employed. It apparently hadn't gotten around to killing my credentials yet, which was either incompetence or someone's quiet act of rebellion. 22 people walked out. 22. Who's counting? Does anyone have a list? Logan, Priya, Dylan, Sarah, Marcus, the QA twins. Wait, Marcus from finance quit too. That Marcus, no different Marcus Systems guy. We have 2 Marises had past tense. Pretty sure they both left. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Who's going to run the infrastructure? That's the neat part. Nobody. I snorted coffee through my nose at that one, which hurt, but was also kind of worth it. Dylan looked at me with concern while I tried not to die in the McDonald's parking lot. You good? He asked. I'm reading the Slack channel, I wheezed. They're losing their minds. We still have access. Priya leaned over from the back seat, her data scientist brain immediately recognizing the research opportunity. Oh, this is going to be good. Screenshot everything. She wasn't wrong. The Slack workspace was turning into a digital riot. The hashtag engineering channel was completely flooded with people trying to figure out who was left and who could actually fix things when they inevitably broke. Spoiler alert, not many people. But that wasn't even the best part. My personal WhatsApp was blowing up with messages from people I hadn't talked to in months. Former colleagues who'd left for other companies, competitors who tried to recruit me before, even a couple of vendors who somehow already knew what happened, which meant the office gossip network had achieved superhuman speed. Heard you left Apex Nova. You okay? Is it true you got fired and took half the company with you? My friend works there and says it's absolute chaos. What happened, dude? Dude, I just heard. Call me. My regular text messages were equally chaotic. A VP I'd worked with on a project 2 years ago sent me a message that just said, I heard, wow. Followed by 3 fire emojis. I wasn't sure if the fire emojis meant you're doing great or everything is on fire, but given the context, probably both. Someone from the C-suite, not Richard obviously, but one of the other executives who'd been in that boardroom sent me a message that was clearly written in a panic. We need to talk. Please call me. This is fixable. The desperation was palpable, even through text. I showed it to Logan. Should I respond? Absolutely not, he said immediately. Let them sweat. They fired. Do you remember? With witnesses and everything. You don't owe them a rapid response time anymore. He had a point. I put the phone face down on the dashboard, but it kept buzzing. The vibrations were getting ridiculous now. Continuous, like my phone had decided its new full-time job was just vibrating forever. An email notification caught my eye before I could look away. The subject line was from someone with a very corporate-sounding title at a venture capital firm. Investment opportunity time sensitive. Oh, that's interesting, I muttered, opening it. The email was short and to the point. Heard about your departure from Apex Nova. 22 people is a ready-made team. If you're starting something new, we should talk. We move fast. I showed it to Priya. Is this real? This feels like spam. She squinted at the email address, then pulled out her own phone and started typing rapidly. Hang on, let me check. Okay, so this guy is legit. He's a partner at Grady Ventures. They funded like 3 unicorns in the last 2 years. This is not spam. This is a legitimate VC sliding into your DMs because he thinks you accidentally created a startup. I didn't create a startup. I protested. I got fired and people felt bad for me. That's not what this looks like from the outside, Logan said, reading over my shoulder. From the outside, this looks like you staged a dramatic walkout, convinced 22 talented people to follow you, and now you're probably starting a competitor, which, to be fair, we should probably do anyway since we're all unemployed. My LinkedIn was having its own separate crisis. 17 connection requests from people I'd never heard of. 5 messages from recruiters with subject lines like amazing opportunity and your next career move. 3 messages from journalists asking if I'd comment on the situation at Apex Nova. 1 message stood out though. It was from David Chun, the CTO of a major tech company I'd definitely heard of, and it just said, "Coffee this week? I think we should talk." Everyone wants to talk, I said, scrolling through the endless notifications. Why does everyone suddenly want to talk? Because you're valuable, Priya said matter-of-factly. And more importantly, Richard just proved you're valuable by having a complete meltdown when you left. Nothing says this person was critical to our operation quite like watching the CEO panic fire them and then watch the whole team walk. Dylan's phone started buzzing, too. Then Logan's, then Priya's. We all pulled out our phones like some kind of synchronized swimming routine and stared at the matching notifications. Someone had created a group chat, not in Slack. We didn't work there anymore, but in WhatsApp. It was called the Dead Weight with a weights emoji, and it included all 22 of us who'd walked out. The first message was from Ahmed from Infrastructure. So, anyone got a plan, or are we all just vibing into unemployment? Vibing into unemployment is my new band name, Dylan typed back immediately. This is serious, Sarah from DevOps wrote. We all just quit our jobs. Jobs plural with health insurance and 401k matching and that weird free fruit basket on Thursdays. The fruit was always mushy though, someone pointed out. Not the point. I watched the conversation spiral. 22 people simultaneously processing their life choices while also making jokes because that's apparently how tech workers handle crisis situations. Someone sent a gift of a building exploding. Another person sent one of a dog in a burning room saying, "This is fine." Then Jessica from Integration sent a message that made everyone pause. My friend in HR just texted me. Richard is in an emergency meeting with legal and they're apparently trying to figure out how much this is going to cost them. Karen is pissed. How pissed? I typed calling her personal attorney pissed. Updating her resume pissed. Might actually quit too pissed. Another message popped up in the thread. This time from Marcus, the finance Marcus, not the systems Marcus. We really did need to differentiate better. Anyone else getting calls from people still inside? They're saying the quarterly projections are completely screwed now. Something about critical personnel loss affecting investor confidence. Good, Dylan typed. Maybe Richard will learn that calling people dead weight has consequences. My phone buzzed with a new email. Then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. One was from a lawyer offering their services. Another was from a business consultant who specialized in startup strategy. A third was from a commercial real estate agent advertising creative office spaces perfect for new ventures. The vultures are circling, I said out loud. Where the opportunities are, Logan corrected. Depends on your perspective. He wasn't wrong. In the span of 30 minutes, my phone had transformed from a communication device into a live feed of corporate chaos, opportunity, and gossip. Every notification was someone wanting something, information, connection, a piece of whatever was happening. My phone buzzed one more time. Another email. This one's subject line made me actually laugh. Heard about the 5-minute deadline. Let's talk about your 5-year plan. I showed it to the group. Dylan burst out laughing. Priya shook her head with a smile. Logan just grinned. Well, I said. At least someone has a sense of humor about all this. My phone vibrated again and again and again. The explosion was just beginning. There's a specific kind of dread that comes with pulling into your driveway in the middle of a workday when you're supposed to be at the office. It's the same feeling you got as a kid when you were sent home from school early and knew you'd have to explain to your parents why you were home at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. Except now you're an adult. And instead of explaining why you got in a fight on the playground, you're about to explain why you're suddenly unemployed because your father-in-law is a vindictive egomaniac. My wife Camilla's car was in the driveway. Of course it was. She worked from home most days doing something with digital marketing that I pretended to understand but honestly couldn't explain if someone put a gun to my head. Something about brand strategy and social media engagement and metrics that apparently mattered to someone somewhere. I sat in my car for a solid 3 minutes, engine off, just staring at our front door like it might suddenly become less intimidating. It didn't. Behind me, I could still hear my phone buzzing from inside my bag. The digital chaos hadn't stopped. It was just muted now. Somewhere in that bag, 22 people were probably still sending messages. Lawyers were drafting documents. And the corporate gossip mill was grinding out new updates about the Apex Nova implosion. But right now, I had to face my wife and explain why I was home at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday with no job and a severance package that might or might not materialize depending on whether her father's lawyers were as incompetent as her father. I walked in. The house smelled like the lavender candle Camilla insisted on burning, even though I'd told her 1,000 times it made the place smell like a funeral home. She was sitting at the dining room table. We'd converted it into her makeshift office, surrounded by her laptop, 2 monitors, a ring light that she used for video calls, and approximately 17 different beverages in various states of consumption. She looked up when I walked in. The expression on her face went through several phases in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, concern, and then something that looked suspiciously like, "Oh no, I already know what happened." "Hey," she said carefully. The way you'd approach a potentially rabid animal. "You're home early." "Yeah, about that," I said, dropping my bag on the couch with probably more force than necessary. "Funny story, your dad fired me today." I watched her face do that thing where she was trying to decide which emotion to display. Should she be sympathetic, angry, defensive? It was like watching someone flip through a Rolodex of appropriate responses and not finding quite the right card. He what? Fired me in front of the entire executive board. Gave me 5 minutes to clean up my desk like I was some intern who'd been caught stealing office supplies. Very dramatic, very public, very illegal. According to Karen from legal, who I'm told nearly had an aneurysm. Camilla set down her coffee or tea or whatever green liquid she was drinking today and rubbed her temples. Okay, I'm sure there's more to this. My dad wouldn't just 22 people walked out with me. I continued because apparently I wasn't done unloading 6 hours of suppressed emotions. Just stood up and left like some kind of corporate mutiny. We're all unemployed now. It's very exciting, very financially irresponsible. The parking lot janitor saluted me with his mop. That's she started then stopped. Wait, Tommy the janitor with the true crime podcasts. That's the one. He yelled solidarity and everything. It was very inspirational. Much more inspirational than your father telling me I had 5 minutes to pack up 6 years of my life. She was quiet for a moment and I could see her doing mental calculations. This was the problem with marrying the boss's daughter. Every work conflict automatically became a family conflict and vice versa. We'd managed to keep those worlds mostly separate for 6 years. But there's no separating them when your father-in-law fires your husband in front of a live studio audience. I'm sure he didn't mean it personally, she finally said, and I actually laughed out loud. A sharp, bitter laugh that surprised even me. Not personally, Camilla. He told me to clean up my desk like I was a janitor who'd gotten caught with his hand in the till in front of 12 executives. After 6 years of making that man look good by actually delivering on the promises he made to investors. Not personally, right? He's been under a lot of stress lately. She tried again, shifting into defense mode. The board has been pushing for better margins and there's been talk about restructuring, and firing his son-in-law in the most humiliating way possible seemed like a solid stress management technique. She sighed that long-suffering sigh that I'd heard approximately 1 million times in our marriage. The one that said, "Why are you making this difficult when I'm trying to smooth things over?" The one that had worked on me for years but wasn't really landing today. "Look, I'll talk to him," she said. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. You know how he gets in meetings? He probably got worked up about something and made a rash decision. He does that sometimes. Remember when he fired the entire marketing team, and then had to hire them all back a week later?" "I remember that," I said. "I also remember that they sued, settled for a frankly impressive amount of money, and your dad learned absolutely nothing from that experience, which is probably why Karen from legal is currently having a meltdown about my contract severance clause." Camilla's eyes widened slightly. "Your contract has a severance clause." "Oh, honey," I said, and I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice anymore. "My contract has a very specific severance clause about what happens when someone fires me in a humiliating public manner. Your dad is about to learn the expensive way that lawyers actually read contracts, even if CEOs don't." She put her head in her hands, and for a second, I felt bad. This wasn't her fault. She hadn't fired me. She hadn't even been there. But she was caught in the middle of it now, stuck between her husband and her father. And that was a position nobody wanted to be in. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "For me, potentially great. 600,000 in severance if they pay up without a fight. More if they want to drag it out. And I sue. For your dad? Well, let's just say he's going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with the board about how he lost critical technical staff, triggered a massive severance payout, and probably tanked investor confidence all in one impressive morning. 600,000. She looked up and I couldn't tell if she was shocked or impressed or calculating what that meant for our finances. Bare minimum. That's if they pay quietly and I sign an NDA and we all pretend this never happened. But between you and me, I don't think I'm signing anything quietly. Your dad gave me 5 minutes to clean up. I'm giving him a 5-year countdown to bankruptcy." She stared at me. That's a very dramatic thing to say. Your dad specializes in drama. I'm just matching his energy. "This isn't a joke," she said. Her voice getting that edge it got when she was trying to be serious and I was being, in her words, deliberately difficult. "You're right. It's not a joke. It's my career. It's 22 other people's careers. It's your father's company circling the drain because he couldn't resist the urge to humiliate someone in front of an audience. This is the opposite of a joke. This is consequences." We sat in silence for a minute. Well, relative silence. My phone was still buzzing in my bag. I could hear it even from across the room. Probably more messages, more emails, more opportunities and gossip and chaos swirling around the smoking crater where my job used to be. "I need you to understand something," I said. Finally, trying to keep my voice level. "Your dad didn't just fire an employee today. He fired the person who actually understood how the technical infrastructure works. The person who trained the team that just walked out with me. The person who'd been covering for his bad decisions and unrealistic promises for 6 years. He didn't fire a problem, he fired the solution." "That's dramatic," she said again. "No, that's facts. You want to know what's dramatic? The Slack channel, the group chats, the VPs calling me asking if I'm starting a competitor. The investors who are already worried about Q4 projections because your dad just lost his core engineering team. That's dramatic. I'm just unemployed. She picked up her phone, probably to text her dad or her mom or her sister, who'd always said marrying within the company was a terrible idea and was about to be proven extremely correct. He's still my father, she said quietly. I know, and I'm still your husband, so you get to navigate that fun little conflict of interest. But here's the thing. I'm not the one who created this problem. I showed up to work. I did my job. I kept my head down and my mouth shut through 6 years of his ego and his tantrums and his complete inability to understand that you can't run a tech company like it's 1985. He fired me. He made this mess and now he gets to lie in it. My phone rang, not buzzed, actually rang with sound and everything. We both looked at my bag like it had suddenly started speaking Latin. You going to get that? Camilla asked. I pulled it out. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 3 seconds later, another call. Different unknown number. Popular guy, she said. And there was something in her voice I couldn't quite read. Apparently, unemployment looks good on me, I said. Venture capitalists want to fund whatever I do next. Recruiters want to place me. Journalists want to interview me. Your dad's competitors probably want to hire me just to piss him off. It's been a very eventful afternoon. Are you enjoying this? She asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. Was I? I took a second to actually think about it. Was I enjoying watching my father-in-law's company implode? Was I enjoying the chaos and the attention and the sudden realization that maybe I was more valuable than I thought? Was I enjoying the freedom of not having to deal with Richard Callaway's garbage ever again? Yeah, I said, honestly, I think I am. She didn't say anything to that. Just looked at me like she was seeing someone she didn't quite recognize, which was fair because I didn't quite recognize myself either. The guy who'd walked into that boardroom this morning, ready to present quarterly reports, was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that sometimes burning bridges creates enough light to see new paths. My phone rang again. I looked at the screen. This time, I recognized the number. It was Logan. I need to take this, I said. Of course you do, Camilla replied, turning back to her laptop. I walked outside to answer, leaving my wife in our lavender-scented house to figure out how to tell her father that his dramatic firing had backfired spectacularly. Sometimes family dinners are just going to be awkward. Might as well embrace it. Here's something they don't teach you in business school. Investors are like sharks. Not in the predatory sense, though that too, but in the can smell blood in the water from miles away sense. And Richard Callaway had just opened a vein in the middle of the ocean while wearing a suit made of chum. I found out later through a glorious combination of office, gossip, leaked emails, and one very drunk former colleague who called me at 11 p.m. that the investor meltdown started approximately 4 hours after I left the building. 4 hours, that's all it took for the news to spread from internal drama to call an emergency board meeting immediately. Apparently, Marcus Chun from finance, who I'd always suspected had a direct line to at least 3 board members, sent what he probably thought was a discreet email to his contact about personnel changes affecting quarterly projections. Except Marcus, bless his spreadsheet-loving heart, couldn't just say, we might have a problem. He had to quantify it with numbers and graphs and a projected revenue impact analysis that apparently made multiple investors choke on their overpriced lattes. The email somehow got forwarded, then forwarded again, then screenshot and posted in a private investor Slack channel that I definitely wasn't supposed to know existed, but did because Dylan used to date someone in investor relations who still felt guilty about how that ended. By Wednesday morning, investors were storming Richard's office like it was Black Friday, and he was selling discounted PlayStations. I heard about it from Sarah, who heard about it from her friend in HR, who'd been pulled in to coordinate meeting rooms because apparently every conference room in the building was suddenly booked with urgent investor relations meetings. The glass-walled fishbowl offices on the executive floor, usually reserved for private conversations that people absolutely tried to lip-read from outside, were full of men in expensive suits gesticulating wildly, while Richard sat there looking like he just realized his parachute was actually a backpack full of bricks. You should see it. Sarah texted me with a photo she definitely wasn't supposed to take. It's like watching a nature documentary. Here we see the CEO in his natural habitat, surrounded by angry investors who just realized they backed a company run by an egomaniac with the business acumen of a potato. The photo showed Richard at his desk, surrounded by at least 6 people I recognized from the board. His usually perfect hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His tie was loosened. He looked tired in that specific way people look when they've been up all night Googling how to fix catastrophic business decision and finding no helpful results according to my sources. And I had multiple sources now because apparently everyone still employed at Apex Nova wanted to keep me updated like I was watching a really engaging reality show. The investors had 3 main concerns. 1. where the hell was the core technical team? 2. Who was going to maintain the existing infrastructure? 3. What the actual was Richard thinking? To be fair, that third one wasn't phrased quite so bluntly in the official meeting notes, but the sentiment was clear. Investors tend to get testy when their portfolio companies spontaneously combust due to CEO ego problems. Richard, to his credit, tried to bluff his way through it. This was a man who'd spent his entire career believing that confidence could compensate for competence, and old habits die hard. According to Miranda, the receptionist, who'd apparently developed a new hobby of eavesdropping and reporting back to anyone who'd listened, Richard started the meeting with his usual bravado. "Gentlemen," he'd said, because of course he'd started with gentlemen, even though at least 2 of the board members were women. "I understand your concerns, but I assure you this is simply a restructuring opportunity. We're eliminating dead weight and positioning ourselves for a more efficient future." Dead weight. He'd actually said it again. The man had learned nothing. Jennifer Morrison, one of the board members who'd made her fortune in enterprise software and had exactly zero tolerance for apparently interrupted him before he could continue his inspirational speech about efficiency and paradigm shifts. "Richard," she'd said, her voice, the kind of calm that makes people more nervous than yelling. "You didn't eliminate dead weight. You eliminated the 22 people who actually understood how your platform works. That's not restructuring. That's amputation without anesthesia." The silence that followed was reportedly spectacular. "We can replace them," Richard had protested. And I imagined him doing the thing he did with his hands when he was nervous, straightening his cufflinks repeatedly like they were going to save him from accountability. "The talent market is full of qualified candidates. We'll hire fresh talent, younger, hungrier, cheaper. This was from David Park, another board member who'd been relatively quiet until that moment. "We're not running a lemonade stand. Richard, you can't just swap out senior engineers like they're interchangeable parts. These people had institutional knowledge. They understood the architecture. They knew where all the bodies were buried. Metaphorically speaking, I hope we have documentation," Richard said. And I laughed out loud when Sarah told me this part because holy the documentation. Our documentation was a running joke. It existed in theory in the sense that we'd occasionally written things down, but it was scattered across 7 different platforms. Half of it was outdated, and the really important stuff, the stuff about why certain systems were built the way they were, lived exclusively in people's heads, specifically in the heads of people who just walked out. "Show me the documentation," Jennifer had said, calling his bluff. Richard apparently couldn't show them the documentation because what documentation existed was largely maintained by, wait for it, the people who just left. The people he called dead weight. The people who were currently sitting in my living room eating pizza and trying to figure out if we were starting a company or just having an extended unemployment party. The meeting had deteriorated from there. Questions about system redundancies, questions about ongoing projects, questions about client relationships, and who was going to handle the technical calls. Every answer Richard gave apparently revealed another gap, another dependency on people who were no longer there. "What about West?" someone had asked. "Can we bring him back?" The room had gone quiet. Richard's face had reportedly done something between a grimace and a snarl, like someone had suggested he eat broken glass for breakfast. "Absolutely not," he'd said. "I won't be held hostage by an employee's ego." The irony of Richard Calloway, a man whose ego had its own zip code, talking about someone else's ego was apparently not lost on the board members. "Richard," Jennifer had said slowly like she was explaining something to a particularly dim child. "You fired him in front of witnesses. You humiliated him publicly. You triggered what I'm told is a substantial severance package. And then 22 other employees walked out in solidarity. That's not his ego. That's your ego creating a $600,000 problem with a mass exodus chaser." "600,000? someone else had asked. "Minimum," Jennifer confirmed. "If he lawyers up and sues for additional damages, we're looking at substantially more plus whatever it costs to actually replace 2 de-skilled employees in a competitive market. Plus the project delays, plus the client confidence issues, plus the general what the hell is happening at this company problem that's already spreading through industry channels." My phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. Jennifer just said, "This is why we have HR protocols. And Richard looks like he wants to die. It's beautiful." David Park had apparently pulled up something on his tablet at this point. "I'm looking at our quarterly projections. These were built on deliverables from teams that no longer exist. Someone want to tell me how we're hitting these numbers now?" More silence. The kind of silence that happens when everyone in the room realizes simultaneously that they're screwed. "We'll adjust the projections?" Richard had said weakly. "Adjust them to what?" Jennifer asked. We hope the replacement employees we haven't hired yet will somehow match the productivity of the experienced team we just lost. That's not a projection, Richard. That's a prayer. According to my sources, the meeting had gone on for 3 more hours. 3 hours of investors systematically dismantling every assumption Richard had made about the company being able to function without us. 3 hours of spreadsheets and scenarios and increasingly panicked questions about legal liability. 3 hours of Richard's confident facade cracking like cheap paint on a sinking ship. By the end of it, the board had apparently given Richard an ultimatum. Fix this or start updating your LinkedIn profile. How does one fix this? He'd asked. And according to Miranda, who was still eavesdropping, he'd actually sounded lost. Defeated, like he'd finally realized that being CEO didn't mean you could just will reality into compliance with your ego. You could start, Jennifer had said, by calling West and apologizing, offering him his job back with a substantial raise and a seat on the executive team, hoping he doesn't laugh in your face. And then hoping he can convince even some of those employees to come back. I can't do that, Richard had said. Then I hope you have a solid backup plan, David had replied. Because I'm looking at our stock price right now and the market is already reacting to rumors about the walkout. We're down 7% since this morning. My phone buzz. Sarah again. He looks like he's going to throw up. This is the best Wednesday I've had in years. I sat there in my home office. Technically the spare bedroom where I'd set up a desk. Reading these updates and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, but vindication. Richard had spent 6 years treating people like replaceable cogs in his personal empire-building machine. Now he was learning the hard way that some cogs are load-bearing and removing them brings down the whole structure. My phone rang. Unknown number again. I was getting like 30 calls a day at this point from investors, recruiters, journalists, and probably a few people who just found my number and wanted to hear the gossip firsthand. This time, I answered, Mr. West, this is Catherine Rodriguez from Pinnacle Equity. We're one of the primary investors in Apex Nova. She paused. I was wondering if you had time for a very frank conversation about your future plans. My future plans, I repeated slowly. Specifically whether those plans include starting a competing company, because if they do, we'd like to discuss moving our investment portfolio accordingly. I smiled. Richard was in his office right now, probably still being grilled by investors, still trying to convince them that everything was fine, that he could fix this, that the company would survive. And here I was getting calls from his own investors asking if they should abandon ship and fund whatever I did next. Karma wasn't just a concept anymore. It was a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon from someone offering you money to compete against your father-in-law. I think I do have time for that conversation, I said. Behind me, I could hear Camilla in the other room, probably on the phone with her father, probably trying to smooth things over like she always did. But some things were beyond smoothing over. Some bridges once burned light up the whole sky. There's a specific tone that lawyers use when they know they've lost before the conversation even starts. It's not quite begging, too professional for that, but it's definitely in the neighborhood of please God, let this person be reasonable because I do not want to go to court over this. It's the legal equivalent of showing up to a gunfight with a butter knife and hoping nobody notices. Richard's lawyers finally called me on Friday, 5 days after the firing. 5 days during which I'd received approximately 73 calls from various interested parties, started preliminary conversations with 3 different venture capital firms, and watched from the sidelines as Apex Nova stock continued its slow-motion nosedive into penny stock territory. I was sitting on my back porch drinking coffee that I'd actually had time to make properly instead of the usual gulp it down while running to meetings routine when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize again. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers had become exhausting, but something made me pick up. Mr. West. The voice on the other end was male. Professionally pleasant in that way that sounds like it's been practiced in a mirror. This is Robert Halloway from Halloway Banks & Associates. We represent Apex Nova in legal matters. Of course you do, I said, taking another sip of coffee. Let me guess. Richard finally realized he stepped on a landmine and you're the poor bastard who has to defuse it. There was a pause. A long one. The kind of pause that happens when someone's carefully prepared script gets thrown out the window by the other person's complete lack of interest in playing along. Yes. Well, Robert cleared his throat. We'd like to discuss a resolution to the recent situation. Situation, I repeated. Is that what we're calling? Your client publicly fired me in front of witnesses and triggered a severance clause he didn't bother to read. A situation? Another pause. I was starting to enjoy these pauses. Each one felt like a small victory. Mr. West, I understand you may feel some frustration about how your termination was handled. Frustration? I interrupted. That's an interesting word choice. You know what else is interesting? The fact that it took you 5 days to call me. 5 days during which your client has been hemorrhaging employees, investors, and credibility. 5 days during which I've had time to talk to my own lawyer, who by the way was very excited about my contract clause. Used words like textbook case and slam dunk. He doesn't even like basketball, so that's saying something. I could hear papers rustling on the other end. Robert was probably looking at his notes or maybe the contract or possibly his own resume because this call wasn't going well for him. We're prepared to offer you a severance package, he said, trying to regain control of the conversation. A generous one, in exchange for signing a mutual non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause. How generous? I asked, even though I already knew what the contract said. I'd read it approximately 40 times in the last 5 days. My lawyer had read it. My wife had read it, though she'd made unhappy sounds the whole time. Even Logan had read it, and he'd literally fisped when he got to the public humiliation multiplier clause. $640,000, Robert said. And I could hear him trying to make it sound like he was doing me a favor. Plus 18 months of benefits continuation, plus immediate vesting of all outstanding stock options. It's a very fair offer. Fair, I said. You keep using these interesting words. Fair would have been not firing me in front of 12 witnesses. Fair would have been following proper termination procedures. Fair would have been your client, not calling me and 22 other people dead weight while his company actively fell apart around him. Mr. West, no. Let me finish, I said, setting down my coffee because I needed both hands free for the amount of sarcasm I was about to deploy. You want to know what I think is fair? I think it's fair that your client is currently sitting in his office probably stress-eating antacids like they're candy watching his company's stock price do an impression of a submarine with a screen door. I think it's fair that investors are calling me asking if they should fund whatever I do next because they've lost confidence in Apex Nova. I think it's fair that the 22 people who walked out with me are all fielding job offers while Richard is trying to hire replacements and discovering that talent doesn't grow on trees. The silence on the other end was beautiful. I could practically hear Robert's carefully constructed negotiation strategy crumbling like a sand castle in a hurricane. $640,000, I continued, is what the contract says I get automatically. That's not an offer. That's the baseline, the starting point. This is what you owe me even if I don't sue you into the next dimension number. Mr. West, I don't think you understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I cut him off. You want this to go away quietly. You want me to sign papers saying I won't talk about what happened. You want me to disappear so Richard can pretend this was just a minor personnel adjustment instead of a catastrophic failure of leadership that cost his company its technical infrastructure and investor confidence. That's not. Here's what I don't understand, I said. And I was genuinely curious now. Why would I sign anything? Why would I take your baseline offer and promise to never talk about this when I could A, sue for additional damages? B, start a competing company with his former employees and his nervous investors' money, or C, just wait and watch his company implode while I field offers from competitors? Explain to me the incentive structure here because I'm not seeing it. Robert made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been a suppressed scream. Hard to tell over the phone. Mr. West, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, I said. Honestly, I'm unemployed. There's a difference. Upset implies emotional investment. I'm just a guy who got fired, watched 22 people follow him out of the building, and is now getting calls from investors who want to fund his next venture. That's not upset. That's liberated. Your wife is Mr. Calloway's daughter, Robert said. Changing tactics. Surely you want to resolve this amicably for family reasons. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, which probably wasn't the reaction he was hoping for. Let me tell you about family reasons. I said, my wife spent the last 5 days trying to convince me that her father didn't mean it personally when he publicly humiliated me. Like telling someone they have 5 minutes to pack up 6 years of their life is somehow not personal. Family reasons are exactly why I'm not interested in making this easy for Richard. He thought family ties would protect him. Thought I'd just take whatever he dished out because divorcing his daughter would be too complicated. He was wrong. Are you saying you're divorcing your wife? Robert asked, and I could hear the lawyer wheels turning. Divorce meant complications, settlements, potential leverage. I'm saying that using my marriage as emotional blackmail isn't the brilliant negotiation strategy you think it is. My wife is an adult who can make her own decisions about whose side she's on. Her father is a CEO who made a monumentally stupid decision and is now facing the consequences. These things can coexist. More paper rustling. Robert was definitely off script now. What would it take? He asked slowly, for you to accept the severance package and sign the agreements. I took another sip of coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but I didn't care. This conversation was too entertaining to interrupt. You want to know what it would take? Let me paint you a picture of what happened. I said, your client fired me in surround sound in front of a live audience. There were 12 executives in that room. Every single one of them heard him. Give me 5 minutes like I was a criminal. That's 12 witnesses. Then 22 employees walked out with me. That's 22 more witnesses. Then the parking lot janitor saluted me with a mop. Okay, that one probably won't hold up in court, but it was awesome. Do you understand what you're dealing with here? I understand there are complications. Robert admitted complications. I repeated. That's one way to put it. Another way would be your client created a legal disaster so comprehensive that it could be used as a case study in what not to do. I've already had 3 employment lawyers reach out offering to take my case pro bono just for the publicity. Pro bono. Do you know how bad you have to screw up for lawyers to want to work for free? Mr. West. The only quiet part, I continued, really warming up now, was when 22 people walked out with me. That was pretty quiet actually, just the sound of chairs squeaking and footsteps echoing. Very cinematic. You'd have appreciated it. But everything else, loud, very loud, public, documented, witnessed, the opposite of quiet, Robert sighed. It was the sigh of a man who just realized his Friday was about to get significantly worse. What do you want? He asked, dropping the professional pleasantness entirely. I want Richard to understand something, I said. I want him to understand that you can't treat people like disposable assets and expect them to quietly disappear when you're done with them. I want him to understand that actions have consequences. I want him to understand that the 22 people he called dead weight were actually the load-bearing walls of his company, and now he gets to watch it collapse. That's not a negotiable request, Robert said. No, it's not. But you asked what I wanted. I paused. Here's what I'll actually accept. Double the severance. So, 1.28 million. No non-disparagement clause. I'll agree not to actively trash talk the company, but I'm not promising to stay silent if asked about my experience. No, NDA. What happened was public. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. And a written apology from Richard acknowledging that the termination was handled inappropriately. The silence stretched out so long I thought the call had dropped. That's not a reasonable counteroffer, Robert finally said. Sure it is, I replied cheerfully. It's completely reasonable compared to what I could get if I sue. My lawyer estimated I could push for $2 million in a wrongful termination suit, plus damages, plus legal fees. So 1.28 with no trial, no publicity, no drawn-out legal battle. That's a bargain. That's me being generous because it's Friday and I'm in a good mood. I'll have to discuss this with my client. You do that, I said. Take your time. Every day Richard waits is another day his stock price drops. Another day his employees jump ship. Another day his investors lose confidence. I'm unemployed. I've got nothing but time. Meanwhile, he's watching his empire crumble in real time. Different pressure situations. Mr. West, I strongly encourage you to reconsider. Robert, I interrupted. Can I call you Robert? Here's the thing. Your client gave me 5 minutes to clean up. I gave him a 5-year countdown to bankruptcy. We're already at day 5, and he's not looking great. Maybe you should encourage him to take the deal before the countdown gets any shorter. I could hear him breathing on the other end, probably counting to 10, probably wishing he'd gone to law school for literally any other kind of law besides corporate damage control. I'll be in touch, he said. I'll be here, I replied. Unemployed, available. Fielding offers from investors. Living my best life. Take your time. I hung up before he could respond and immediately texted Logan. Richard's lawyers just called. They sound like they've been dragged through gravel. His response came back immediately. Please tell me you made them cry. Not cry. I texted back, but definitely regret their career choices. My phone buzzed with another call. Unknown number. Probably another investor, another recruiter, another opportunity growing in the fertile soil of Richard Callaway's spectacular failure. I answered with a smile. Unemployment never looked so good. Within a week, we had an office space. And when I say office space, I mean a dingy warehouse in the industrial district that smelled vaguely like old pizza and broken dreams. The lights flickered like they were sending Morse code distress signals. The bathroom door didn't lock properly. There was a mysterious stain on the carpet that nobody wanted to investigate too closely. But you know what? It had heart. It had character. It had significantly cheaper rent than anything in the business district where Apex Nova lorded over everyone from their glass tower. The 22 who'd followed me out weren't just coworkers anymore. They were co-founders, partners, the core team of something that hadn't quite been born yet, but was definitely gestating. We stood in that warehouse on Monday morning looking at the flickering lights and questionable infrastructure, and someone, I think it was Dylan, said what we were all thinking. This is either the best decision we've ever made or we're all going to be living in our parents' basement by Christmas. Why not both? Priya replied, and everyone laughed because Gallows humor was pretty much our brand now. We called ourselves Nova Forge. The name came from a late-night brainstorming session where we were all slightly drunk on cheap beer and the intoxicating possibility of actually pulling this off. Nova because we were rising from the ashes of Apex Nova. Petty, yes, but satisfying. Forged because we were building something new, something better, something that didn't involve Richard Colloway's ego making decisions. Our slogan, we don't fire family in 5 minutes. Logan designed a logo on his laptop while sitting on a folding chair because we didn't have actual office furniture yet. It was simple, a hammer striking an anvil with sparks flying upward. Cliché, absolutely, but it looked good on the business cards that Priya ordered before we even had business to put on cards. The investors signed on faster than Richard could say low-hanging fruit. Remember Catherine Rodriguez from Pinnacle Equity? She'd been so impressed by my phone negotiation with Richard's lawyer, which had somehow leaked because nothing stays secret in the tech world, that she'd fast-tracked our funding application. We had our first term sheet within 72 hours. Our first actual check cleared before the end of the week. $2 million in seed funding. Not bad for a company that consisted of 23 unemployed people in a warehouse with questionable electrical wiring. Is this real? Sarah asked, staring at the funding confirmation email on her phone like it might disappear if she blinked. It's real. I confirmed. We're actually doing this. We had contracts lined up before we even officially opened for business. Turns out when you fire your entire technical team, those clients who depended on that team start looking for alternatives. And when those alternatives include the exact same people who used to serve them, just under a different company name. Well, that's what we call a seamless transition. 3 of Apex Nova's biggest clients reached out within the first week. Not to Apex Nova, to us, to Nova Forge. They'd heard through the grapevine, the very active, very gossipy tech industry grapevine, that we were starting fresh and they wanted in before Richard's company completely imploded and took their projects down with it. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. And we were doing it in a warehouse that smelled like regret and ambition. 2 weeks, that's all it took for the headlines to start rolling in like a tsunami of Schadenfreude. Apex Nova implodes after mass walkout. Tech company loses core team. Stock plummets 40%. CEO's 5-minute firing triggers corporate exodus. My personal favorite was from TechCrunch. How to destroy your company in 5 minutes. A case study. The stock didn't just drop, it plummeted, nosedived. Did that thing where financial analysts start using phrases like catastrophic loss of investor confidence and systemic failure of leadership. 40% in 2 weeks. I'd seen crypto crashes that were more stable, but the stock price was just the opening act. The real show was the lawsuits, plural, multiple, a veritable parade of legal actions that made Karen Briggs from legal probably regret every career decision that led her to Apex Nova. Shareholders filed a class action suit, claiming mismanagement. 3 major clients sued for breach of contract when their projects collapsed without the technical team to support them. 2 former employees who'd been fired before me. Apparently, Richard had a pattern came forward with their own wrongful termination claims, smelling blood in the water. And then there was my lawsuit. Well, not quite a lawsuit. Richard's lawyers had come back with a counter-offer to my $1.28 million demand. They'd offered $900,000 and looked like they were in physical pain doing it. I'd accept it, not because I needed to be generous, but because watching Richard write that check was more satisfying than dragging it out in court. Sometimes revenge is better served quickly while it's still hot and painful. The press conference happened on a Thursday, 2 weeks and 3 days after the 5-minute deadline that started everything. I stood on a small stage in our dingy warehouse. We'd cleaned it up considerably, added some lighting, made it look almost professional, flanked by my 22 co-founders. The local tech media had shown up in force. So had some national outlets. Bloomberg, Forbes, even the Wall Street Journal sent someone, probably because watching a CEO self-destruct in real time was apparently newsworthy. Richard was having his own press conference at the same time. I'd heard about it through the grapevine. His PR team had apparently insisted he address this situation publicly, try to control the narrative, reassure investors that everything was fine and the company was pivoting toward a stronger future. All the usual corporate crisis management buzzwords that nobody believes, but everyone expects you to say anyway. I wondered if he knew I was doing this at the exact same time. Probably. Richard always did have a talent for making everything a competition, even his own professional demise. Good afternoon, I said into the microphone and the room went quiet. Camera flashes popped. Someone's phone was definitely recording this for social media. My name is James West, and 2 weeks ago I was fired from Apex Nova. I was given 5 minutes to pack up 6 years of my career. It was humiliating. It was public, and according to multiple employment lawyers, it was also very illegal. Some people in the crowd laughed. Others were typing frantically on their laptops. But I'm not here to talk about what happened. I'm here to talk about what happens next. I gestured to the people standing behind me. These are the 22 people who walked out with me that day. They didn't have to. They had mortgages, families, student loans, cats with kidney disease. Dylan grinned at that reference. They left anyway because they believed in something more important than job security. They believed in loyalty, in respect, in the idea that people shouldn't be treated like disposable assets. I paused, letting that sink in. Today, I'm proud to announce the launch of Nova Forge. We're not just a company. We're a statement. A statement that says you can't fire your way to success. You can't humiliate people and expect them to quietly disappear. You can't call 22 talented individuals dead weight and expect your company to keep standing. More camera flashes. Someone shouted a question that I ignored because I was on a roll. We've secured $2 million in seed funding. We've signed contracts with 3 major clients. Clients who coincidentally used to work with Apex Nova. We're hiring. We're growing. And we're doing it all in a warehouse that smells vaguely like old pizza, but has more heart than any glass tower ever could. The crowd was eating it up. I could see people smiling, nodding, probably already writing their headlines. To the man who gave me 5 minutes to clean up, I said, looking directly into the nearest camera. Thank you. That's all I needed. 5 minutes to realize I was working for the wrong company. 5 minutes to discover that 22 people valued integrity over paychecks. 5 minutes to start something better. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed like a strobe light. Reporters shouted questions. Someone whistled, probably Tommy the janitor, who'd somehow gotten an invite and showed up with his mop like it was a formal accessory. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Callaway was sweating through his own press conference. I found out later that he tried to blame the whole thing on restructuring challenges and personnel disagreements. He tried to spin it as a positive, as an opportunity for fresh talent and new directions. He'd even tried to suggest that my departure was mutual and amicable. Nobody bought it. Not with the stock price speaking louder than his carefully prepared statements. Not with the lawsuits piling up. Not with his former employees literally holding a competing press conference at the exact same time, looking happy and funded and successful while he looked like a man watching his legacy circle the drain. The questions from his press conference apparently got brutal. Mr. Callaway, is it true you called your former employees dead weight? Can you explain why 22 people left simultaneously? How do you respond to claims that your company can't function without the technical team? What's your plan for replacing institutional knowledge? Richard had apparently stammered through answers that satisfied nobody, made excuses that convinced no one, and generally looked like a man who'd finally run out of confidence to substitute for competence. By Friday, the board had called an emergency meeting. By Monday, Richard Callaway was no longer CEO of Apex Nova. The official statement said he was stepping down to pursue other opportunities, which is corporate speak for, we fired him before he could destroy what's left of the company. The irony was delicious. The man who fired me in 5 minutes had just been fired himself, except it took the board about 3 hours of deliberation and probably involved significantly more paperwork and severance negotiations. I hoped his severance package had a public humiliation clause. I hoped someone gave him 5 minutes to clean up his desk. I hoped he understood finally what it felt like. I was sitting in my warehouse office. We'd gotten actual furniture by this point, though nothing fancy when the news broke. Logan burst in waving his phone like he just won the lottery. He's out, Logan yelled. Richard's out. The board fired him. The entire office erupted in cheers. Someone popped champagne, the cheap kind, because we were still a startup. And suddenly, we were having an impromptu celebration in a warehouse that 2 weeks ago had been empty except for dreams and determination. My phone rang. Camilla. I stepped outside to answer. The sounds of celebration muffled behind me. You heard? She said, not a question. I heard. Silence for a moment. Then, are you happy? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Was I happy that my father-in-law had been fired? Was I happy that his company was struggling? Was I happy that everything he'd built was crumbling because of one monumentally stupid decision? I'm satisfied, I said finally. There's a difference. He's devastated, she said quietly. He devastated himself. I replied, I didn't fire him. The board did, his investors did, his own decisions did. I just existed and built something better. Another pause. My mother wants to know if you're coming to Sunday dinner. I laughed. Actually laughed because the absurdity of that question after everything that had happened was just too much. Is your father going to be there? Probably. Then probably not, I said. At least not for a while. Maybe when he's ready to apologize. Actually, apologize. Not the corporate. I'm sorry you felt that way. A non-apology. That might be a long time, Camilla said. I've got time, I replied. I'm an entrepreneur now. I make my own schedule. I could hear her smile through the phone. You sound different. I am different. Unemployment looks good on me. We said goodbye and I stood there for a moment in front of my dingy warehouse, listening to my team celebrate inside, thinking about how 5 minutes had changed everything. 5 minutes had ended my career at Apex Nova. 5 minutes had started a company. 5 minutes had proven that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success. My phone buzz. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on Nova Forge. When you're ready to scale, call me. Jennifer Morrison, board member. Even Richard's own board members were reaching out now. The man had truly scorched every bridge, including the ones he was standing on. I walked back inside, back to the celebration, back to my team, my family, and someone handed me a plastic cup of cheap champagne. Dylan raised his cup for a toast. To Richard Callaway, he said with a grin, for giving us exactly 5 minutes to realize we could do better. To 5 minutes, everyone echoed. We drank cheap champagne in a warehouse that smelled like ambition and possibility. And somewhere across town, Richard Callaway was probably sitting in his expensive house, wondering how it all went so wrong so fast. 5 minutes, that's all it took to end an empire and start a revolution. And I'd do it all over again.